The morning light spilled gently across the polished surfaces of oak and ember. A small coffee house tucked between a faded bookstore and a florist that always smelled like spring. It wasn't the kind of place people discovered through Instagram or food blogs. It lived in whispers, in quiet word-of-mouth compliments passed between friends. You have to try the coffee there. There's something special about it. Inside, everything felt like a pause. Velvet armchairs softened the corners. Shelves lined with old records and paperbacks muffled the city's noise. And in the midst of it all, behind the bar, stood a young woman who moved like she belonged in silence. Her name was Alina Hart, and though she'd worked here for almost 4 years, most customers wouldn't remember her face. They would remember her coffee. She wasn't invisible by accident. Alina preferred the stillness, the unnoticed moments, the way she could focus when no one was looking. There was something sacred in the craft, the warmth of the steamed milk, the soft pull of espresso, the delicate layering of flavors she created in her mind like brushstrokes on a canvas. To her, coffee wasn't just a drink. It was a memory, waiting to be made, a quiet kind of art. What she didn't know was that someone was watching her more carefully than she realized. This Tuesday, morning started like most others. The sky outside was the color of pearl, and the line at the counter moved with the slow rhythm of regulars who already knew what they wanted. Alina stood behind the bar, sleeves rolled up just past her elbows, a faint coffee stain near the hem of her apron. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, a few strands escaping near her cheek. She worked without a word, her hands fluid, the result of muscle memory and careful precision. But something was different today. A man in a charcoal gray coat had been sitting by the window since opening time. No laptop, no phone, just a quiet cup of coffee and a paperback that never seemed to turn past page 1. He wasn't part of the usual morning crowd, and though he hadn't spoken more than a few words, Alina felt his presence like the low hum of a cello, steady and impossible to ignore. Still, she focused. She reached for the small tin tucked behind the stacked mugs. Inside was a blend she made herself: dried rose petals, orange peel, a hint of clove. She called it Winter Bloom. It wasn't on the menu. She only made it when she needed to feel something more than routine. She infused it into the milk, slow and careful, then poured the mixture into a cup of dark roast she had just pulled. The scent lifted gently into the air, delicate and floral, warming the space around her. "You always make the most interesting things when you're in your own world," said Mika, her co-worker and only real friend at the shop. She was leaning against the counter, sipping from her own cup, watching Alina the way someone watches a musician, mid-performance. "It's just for me," Alina murmured, almost apologetically. "No one wants floral coffee." "I do," Mika said. "And I'm not no one." Alina smiled softly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's not official. It's not tested or approved. It's just ... an idea." "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I say it like it doesn't matter," Alina replied, her voice low, steady. "Ideas don't count if no one hears them." She turned away, rinsing her tools. But behind her, Mika sighed. "You hide brilliance behind modesty, Alina. One day, someone's going to see it, whether you're ready or not." Alina didn't answer. She didn't know how to. The truth was, she'd stopped believing that her ideas were enough a long time ago. There had been a time years ago when she'd dreamed of opening her own cafe, a space where she could invent, create, play with flavor like a painter plays with light. But dreams had a way of dissolving in the face of responsibility. Her father's illness, the bills, the reality of keeping things steady. She had learned to be practical, quiet, safe. But as she turned to set a finished drink on the counter, her eyes flicked toward the man by the window. He was looking at her, not in the way people look when they're curious, but in the way they look when they're listening. As if her silence had said something out loud, she blinked, looked away, told herself she was imagining it. By noon, the morning rush had faded. The shop was quieter now, the kind of lull that felt like a breath held between moments. Mika had stepped out to run errands. Alina was alone at the bar, reorganizing syrups and humming softly under her breath. And then, just as she reached for the lavender bottle, a voice spoke from across the counter. "That smelled. What is it?" She looked up. The man in the grey coat was standing there, holding his empty cup. He was older than she'd guessed, maybe late 40s. Salt and pepper hair, a kind face. His tone was warm but direct. "I'm sorry," she said. "That last drink you made, the floral one, I could smell it from over there. I've never smelled coffee like that before." Her cheeks flushed. "Oh, that was just something I was experimenting with. It's not on the menu." "Do you make a lot of drinks that aren't on the menu?" She hesitated. "Sometimes." He set his cup down gently. "Well, I'd like to try that one. The floral blend." Alina hesitated. She never served her blends to strangers. They were personal, unfinished, but something in his expression was open, encouraging. "All right," she said, quietly, "but I'll need a few minutes." As she moved through the familiar steps, grinding, steaming, pouring, her hands trembled. Slightly, not from fear, exactly, but from the weight of being seen, really seen. When she placed the finished drink in front of him, she didn't speak, just watched. He took a sip, closed his eyes, and then, to her astonishment, smiled. "That," he said, "is unlike anything I've ever tasted." Alina blinked, in a good way, or in the best way. She looked down, fiddling with her apron string. "Thank you. I call it winter bloom. It's not very professional, I know. I didn't study formally. I never finished culinary school." He tilted his head. "You don't need a degree to create something that makes people feel something. That's talent, and it can't be taught." She didn't know what to say. Compliments always caught her off guard. They felt like doors she was afraid to walk through. The man offered his hand. "I'm Nicholas. I'm in town for a few days. Would you mind if I stopped by again tomorrow? I'd like to try whatever you make next." She shook his hand slowly, eyes wide. "Alina, and I'd like that." As he walked away, Alina stood still, her hand lingering over the bar. She didn't know his last name. She didn't know what he did for a living. She didn't know that he was the CEO of one of the fastest growing hospitality companies in the country. And she didn't know that this simple moment, this quiet offering of a dream in a cup, would be the first spark in something much, much bigger than she ever imagined. But she would, very soon. That night, Alina sat on the edge of her small studio apartment bed, a mug of chamomile tea resting untouched on the windowsill. Outside, the city glowed in soft orange streaks and distant sirens, but inside, her mind was replaying every moment of that brief conversation at the cafe. She couldn't shake the image of Nicholas, the way he had spoken, not just with words but with a kind of presence that made her feel like her voice, her work, her little ideas mattered. It was unsettling, beautiful, frightening. She had spent years keeping her creativity hidden beneath layers of practicality, only sharing it in fragments like flavor notes in a cup, never the whole recipe, never the full dream. She'd convinced herself that people didn't want more from her than what was expected, that the world had enough voices already, and yet, today, someone had asked for more. She pulled out her old sketchbook from under the bed. It was worn, edges frayed, the pages filled with flavor ideas, scribbled mock-up menus, and designs for a cafe she used to imagine opening one day. She hadn't looked at it in almost 2 years, but tonight, the air felt different, charged. Flipping through the pages, she stopped at a watercolor she'd painted of a tiny cafe storefront. Above the door was a name, The Quiet Cup. She smiled sadly. It had felt so impossible once. Still did, in some ways, but not as far away as it used to. The next morning at Oak and Ember, she arrived an hour earlier than usual. She wanted to try something new, something bold but soft, like confidence blooming through doubt. She called it Sunrise, Mr. Blend, of citrus, vanilla, and a subtle thread of cardamom, woven through a light roast brew. It tasted like hope on a cold morning. She was halfway through the prep when Mika arrived, pausing at the door with a raised brow. "You're here early. You're planning to take over the shop?" Alina laughed under her breath. "Just experimenting. You always say that, but yesterday, that guy Nikolaski came back after you left, asked what time you usually work." Alina paused. "He did." Mika nodded, eyes gleaming. "Said he's in town for some kind of business meeting but wanted to stop by again. I think he was genuinely impressed." Alina tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "He was just being kind." "No," Mika said firmly. "He was being interested, and you're allowed to believe that." By the time the bell over the door jingled mid-morning, Alina had prepared 2 samples of Sunrise Mist, one for herself, one just in case. Nicholas walked in without hesitation, his eyes scanning the room until they found hers. There was something different in the way he looked at her today, like someone returning to a story they couldn't wait to keep reading. "You remembered," Alina said softly, sliding the cup toward him before he could ask. "I never forget." "Something that good," he said, taking a sip. "And this is even better." Elena's heart fluttered. She reached for a towel, pretending to clean the counter. I just try things sometimes. Most people don't notice. I notice, he said, then added, and I think a lot of people would, if they had the chance. She glanced up, uncertain how to respond. Compliments made her uncomfortable. They lit a match inside her that she didn't quite know how to hold. Nicholas leaned forward slightly. Have you ever considered starting something of your own? Elena blinked. Like a business. He nodded. She gave a nervous laugh. Only in my dreams, and even then, it feels out of reach. Why? Because I'm not. I don't have the connections, the money, the confidence. The only thing I really have is a sense of taste and a notebook full of ideas. Sometimes, Nicholas said, that's all it takes. There was a long pause between them, not awkward, just full, like something unspoken had entered the room. Up then, just as quietly, he asked, would you ever want to show me that notebook? Elena felt as if someone had just asked to read her diary. That sketchbook was a piece of her fears, her hopes, her secret conversations with herself. But for some reason, her head nodded before she could stop it. Yes, I could bring it tomorrow. Nicholas smiled. I'd like that, very much. Later that afternoon, after he left, Mika rushed back to the bar. Okay, she whispered. I looked him up. Elena frowned. You what? I looked him up, Mika repeated, clearly unable to contain herself. His name is Nicholas Rowan. He's not just some guy in town. He's the CEO of Rowan and Wren Hospitality Group. They own over a dozen boutique cafes and restaurants across the country. He's a big deal. Elena's breath caught. That can't be right. It is, Mika said. That's why he's here. He's scouting for something new. And he's talking to you, Elena. Elena sat down on the small stool behind the counter. Her legs felt weightless. She had shared her drink with a stranger, and that stranger might be the very person who could change the entire direction of her life. But more than that, for the first time, she felt something stirring inside her that had been asleep for years. Possibility. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing: she wasn't just making coffee anymore. She was making something that mattered, and someone had finally noticed. The next morning, the city woke in a hush of mist and early light, and Elena arrived at the cafe before even the milk delivery truck had rumbled down the street. She clutched her sketchbook like a secret letter, the corner slightly bent, the elastic band stretched and faded from years of being opened and closed. Dream after dream scribbled inside. Her hands trembled not from the cold but from everything that had shifted in just 24 hours. It had only been 2 conversations, 2 cups of coffee, but something was changing. Inside her, around her. She took a deep breath, inhaling the quiet hum of the espresso machine as it warmed. There was something sacred in these moments before customers came, like the world paused just long enough for a whisper of courage to form. By the time Nicholas arrived, Elena had brewed a fresh pot of her new citrus spice blend and placed 2 ceramic mugs, no paper, today on the counter. The moment she saw him, she couldn't help but wonder how she had not noticed before. The ease with which he moved, the way others in the cafe glanced at him without realizing why. He had that quiet authority people didn't question. Not loud, not flashy, but present. Fully he smiled as he approached. You're early again. I could say the same to you, she said, pushing the mug toward him. This one's called Amber Light. It's not finished. I'm still figuring it out. Nicholas took a sip and closed his eyes, letting the flavor unfold before saying anything. Elena watched him carefully, not for approval, but to study how someone experienced what she created. When he opened his eyes again, something in them had shifted. You don't need to figure it out, he said. This is ready. This is real. Elena lowered her gaze. I brought the sketchbook. Nicholas's attention sharpened. See it. Her fingers hesitated at the edge of the cover, suddenly unsure if she was ready to let this piece of her out into the world. But she reminded herself, sometimes silence protects us, but sometimes it hides us. She opened it, page after page of recipes, cafe layouts, hand-drawn logos, names she'd brainstormed in the middle of sleepless nights, detailed notes about customer experience, scent design, the feeling she wanted people to have when they walked through the door. Nicholas turned each page slowly, carefully, like each one was precious. When he reached a watercolor of a cafe entrance, framed by hanging jasmine and soft lantern light, he looked up at her. This is beautiful, he said. I always thought I'd open a space that felt like a memory, she said quietly. Not just a place to get coffee, but a place to belong, to feel safe, seen, even if just for 10 minutes a day. Nicholas didn't respond right away. Instead, he closed the sketchbook, held it gently in his hands, and looked at her in a way that made her feel entirely unhidden. "Elena," he said, "I don't know what brought me into this cafe 2 days ago, but I'm beginning to think it wasn't by accident." She gave a soft laugh, almost a scoff. "You mean fate? Maybe something close," he said, "because I've been looking for a new partner, not just to launch another shop but to build something honest, soulful, something the world doesn't know it needs yet." She blinked. "You're offering me a job?" "No," he said gently. "I'm offering you a choice." He set the sketchbook down and leaned in. "You can keep making perfect drinks for strangers who may never know your name, or you can build something from your heart and let the world meet the woman behind the cup." Elena's breath hitched. "But I'm not ready. I don't know anything about starting a business. I never finished school. I can't lead a team. What if I fail?" Nicholas nodded, not dismissing her fears. "Every founder I know said the same thing at the beginning. Fear doesn't mean you're unqualified. It means you care. And caring is the secret ingredient most places never figure out." She swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because you see the world in flavor and feeling," he said. "You understand people, even if you don't think you do. I've seen a lot of menus, a lot of coffee, but I haven't felt something like this in years. You don't need permission to be exceptional, Elena. You just need someone who believes it with you." There was a long pause, long enough for the espresso machine to hiss into silence. "I need to think," she whispered. "Of course," he replied, "but just know I'm not offering you a position. I'm offering you a partnership, creative control, vision, a place where your sketchbook becomes the blueprint, not just a side project." He stood and buttoned his coat. "I'll be in town for 2 more weeks, no pressure, just possibility." As he walked out, the bell above the door rang with a quieter chime than usual. Elena sat at the counter, staring at her sketchbook, her heart hammering against the inside of her ribs, like a bird testing its wings. She had imagined this moment, dreamed about someone finding her work and saying it was good enough, real enough, worth something. But the truth was scarier than the dream, because now the next move was hers, and for the first time in her life, the fear wasn't just about being unseen. It was about finally being seen and not knowing if she was ready to rise into that light. Yet even as doubt lingered, so did something else. A spark, not a roaring fire. Not yet, but something was catching flame, something she couldn't put out. The following morning. The cafe felt different, not because of anything Elena could see or touch, but because of what she felt. There was a weight to every movement, an awareness behind every thought, like the future was suddenly standing right beside her, asking her quietly, "Are you coming?" The sketchbook remained tucked beneath the bar where she could reach it if she needed to remind herself that the past few days hadn't been a dream. She hadn't slept much. Instead, she'd spent the night pacing between pages, every recipe, every drawing, every note scribbled in a moment of inspiration or doubt. Was it really as good as he said? Or had she just imagined it all, distorted by hope? But as the cafe filled with the gentle murmur of early regulars and the soft chime of milk steamers warming into rhythm, Elena noticed something. She wasn't hiding, her shoulders weren't curled inward, her voice wasn't shrinking beneath the sound of the machines. She was here, awake in a way she hadn't felt in years. Mika noticed it too. She paused mid-shift, studying Elena with a raised brow. "You've got a spark in your eye, like something clicked." Elena smiled. "I think someone opened a door I didn't know was still there. Let me guess. That man from yesterday," Mika said, grinning as she restocked the napkins. "The one who drinks like he's reading poetry." Elena laughed, truly laughed for the first time in days. "Yeah, him. What did he say to you?" "He asked me to build something with him. Not just work for him, build something." Mika blinked. "Wait, seriously?" Elena nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she poured a cappuccino. "But I don't know if I'm ready. It's everything I ever wanted, but now that it's real." "You're afraid you're not enough," Mika finished, setting the napkin holder down. "Elena, you've been building this place with your soul since day one. Every time someone walks out smiling because of something you made, that's a piece of the dream already alive." Elena swallowed hard. "What if I fail? Then you'll learn, and then you'll rise again." It wasn't just comfort, it was truth, and somehow that truth gave Elena the courage to do something she'd never done before. She printed out one of her drink concepts from the sketchbook, the Jasmine Reverie, and placed it on the chalkboard. Specials: a delicate mix of jasmine-infused espresso, almond milk, and a honey rose drizzle. Not officially on the menu, not something approved by management, just a flavor from her heart. By noon, 3 people had asked for it. By 2 o'clock, one customer asked if they could take a picture of the drink. It was too pretty not to. By 5, she'd made 15. And then, just as the light softened into golden hour and the street lamps blinked alive, Nicholas walked in. He saw the chalkboard first, then Alina, then the look on her face that said more than words could hold. "You did it," he said, walking to the counter. She nodded, breath caught in her throat. "I didn't ask permission. I needed to know if it was just me who believed in it. And now you know," he said. "I do." He took a sip of the Jasmine Reverie, without her offering. It just picked it up like it belonged to him, like she had created it for this moment, and smiled after the first taste. "Alina," he said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent, "I'm heading back to the West Coast tomorrow, but I want to show you something before I go." She hesitated. "Show me what?" He pulled a sleek black folder from his coat pocket and placed it on the counter. Inside were mock-ups, drafted branding concepts, architectural sketches, and a business proposal already halfway filled in. Out at the top of the document was a name. She hadn't told anyone beyond Mika. The Quiet Cup. Her breath caught. "How did you?" "I saw it in your sketchbook," he said gently, "and it stayed with me." She ran her hand over the paper like it might disappear if she blinked. The pages detailed a plan, a joint venture between Nicholas's hospitality group and a new flagship cafe led by a creative partner with full artistic control. He hadn't just believed in her, he'd been preparing for her to say yes. "I haven't even answered," she whispered. "I'm not asking for a yes today," he said. "I'm asking you to imagine what saying yes might feel like." The cafe was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that feels full, like silence that has been earned. "I need to see it," she said finally. "Really see it." "I thought you might," he said, sliding his phone across the counter. On the screen was an address. "Tomorrow, noon. It's a property I've been holding on to for years, waiting for the right idea and the right person." She looked down at the address. It was only 5 subway stops away. "You want me to see the space?" she asked. "I want you to walk into your future," he said, standing up, "and decide if you're ready to stay." As he turned and walked toward the door, the wind outside caught the edge of his coat, carrying with it a moment so surreal it felt cinematic. Alina stood still behind the bar, her apron dusted with honey powder and almond milk, a jasmine flower pinned beside the cash register like it had bloomed just for her. This wasn't just a chance, that it was a crossroad. One path was safe, familiar, predictable. The other was steep, scary, unknown. But something deep in hers, something older than fear, was beginning to whisper louder. What if the dream isn't too big? What if I've just been shrinking myself to fit into smaller rooms? What if I'm finally standing at the door of the life I was always meant to live? And what if the key has been in my pocket this whole time? She looked out the cafe window, the city stretching wide before her, and whispered under her breath, "Tomorrow?" And this time, it didn't sound like a delay. It sounded like a promise. The next day arrived wrapped in a kind of quiet that didn't feel like hesitation, it felt like reverence. Alina stood outside the address Nicholas had given her, a modest brick building with tall arched windows and ivy curling round the edges like it had waited too long for something to grow inside. Her hands, warm from holding a thermos of her own jasmine blend, were trembling not from fear exactly, but from something closer to awe. This was the moment, not the moment someone handed her something, but the moment she had to decide if she would take it as she stepped through the front door. A faint creak welcomed hair floorboards that had been silent for years, suddenly giving voice. Dust particles shimmered in shafts of light through the windows, and the air smelled like old wood and forgotten dreams. The space wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it had good bones, and more importantly, it had potential. Alina walked slowly across the wide, empty floor, her fingers trailing along the raw edges of the walls, already imagining where the chalkboard menu might go, where the soft pendant lights could hang low, where the coffee bar would curve like an invitation. Rather than a barrier, she stood in the middle of the room, closed her eyes, and tried to hear it, not the silence but the future, and for the first time she could. Footsteps behind her broke the stillness. Nicholas stepped inside, holding a tablet and 2 takeaway coffees, one for her, one for himself. "Well," he asked, handing her the drink. Alina looked around. "It's quiet." He smiled. "That's the point." She turned to face him. "I need to ask something." "Anything." "Why me?" she asked again, though it felt different this time, not out of insecurity, but out of a genuine need to understand. Nicholas didn't answer right away. He walked to the far window, looked out for a moment, then turned back. "You remind me of someone I once knew," he said. "Someone who had ideas no one saw because he wasn't loud enough. He worked in silence, like you, but he gave everything he had into the things he made." "Was it you?" Alina asked. He nodded slowly. "A long time ago, before the suits, before the titles. I was a kid in the back of my uncle's bakery, mixing spices when no one was looking. I used to think success was about being seen, but the truth is, it's about being believed in. And when I walked into your cafe, I saw someone I would have wanted beside me back then." Alina swallowed hard. "You don't think I'll mess this up?" "I know you will," he said, grinning. "That's how it works. But I also know you'll figure it out, because you already are. And I'm not investing in perfection, Alina. I'm investing in someone who listens, who cares, who dares to add jasmine to espresso even if no one's asking for it." She exhaled a shaky breath. "So what happens now?" "We walk the space," he said, handing her the tablet. On the screen was a floor plan, a rough outline, but beside it were blank spaces labeled with a simple word: your call, lighting, menu, themes, layout, music, atmosphere, even scent. "You don't have to know everything today," he said, "but this is where we begin." The rest of the afternoon blurred into something both ordinary and extraordinary. They paced every inch of the space, from the scuffed baseboards to the back room with a view of the alley that, with a little love, could become a secret garden patio. Nicholas asked her opinion about everything, and every time she hesitated, he reminded her this was hers to shape. The sun was beginning to dip by the time they locked the door behind them. Alina held the tablet tightly to her chest as they stood in silence on the sidewalk. "You still have time to say no," Nicholas said gently. "Nothing's signed yet. If you walk away, I'll understand." Alina looked down at the sidewalk, then up at the windows that reflected the pink hues of dusk. Her reflection stared back, smaller than the city, smaller than the dream, but more certain than she'd ever seen herself. "I've spent my whole life waiting to feel ready," she said, "and I don't think I ever truly will. But I think maybe it's not about being ready. Maybe it's about beginning anyway." Nicholas didn't respond. He just nodded and reached into his coat for a small envelope. Inside was a set of keys, not fancy, just brass, worn a little on the edges, but they gleamed under the streetlight like something holy. She took them, and that was the moment everything changed. Later that night, as she sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by notes, sketches, and scraps of paper from old dream journals, Alina felt the shift happening, not just in her circumstances, but in herself. She was no longer the shy girl behind the bar. She was the woman holding the key to a door that led not just to a cafe but to a life she had only dared to imagine. And in that small, quiet space where her heart used to whisper doubts, something stronger was beginning to rise. A voice that said, "Build it, even if you're scared, even if you're scared, even if you stumble, even if no one gets it at first, because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more truth." And her truth was about to bloom in a place called the Quiet Cup. Asterisk. There's a kind of stillness that settles just before a door opens, not the literal kind, but the kind that lives in your chest. That morning, Alina stood in front of the Quiet Cup, keys in hand, the street behind her still humming with city sounds she'd long grown used to, but the world felt quieter now, like it was pausing with her, holding its breath, waiting. The door creaked open, and with it, her future. The next few months moved like a dream in fast forward. Not a perfect dream, but the kind filled with equal parts beauty and chaos. Panned cans tipped over, supplier mishaps, blueprints changed at the last minute, and evenings that bled into early mornings as she and Nicholas worked side by side to bring the space to life. She learned how to argue with architects and charm contractors. She found herself leading tastings for blend options, writing menu copy until midnight, even learning how to source sustainable ingredients from independent farms, each choice intentional, thoughtful, and deeply personal. The name above the door wasn't just a sign. It was a philosophy. The Quiet Cup wasn't going to be just another trendy cafe. It was going to be a sanctuary for those who didn't always know how to speak loudly, who didn't always feel like they belonged in the noise. It would be a home for quiet brilliance, for ideas shared in soft voices, for flavors that whispered stories. When the grand opening finally arrived, Elena was the last one to get dressed. She stood in the staff bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied the apron, custom-stitched with a small jasmine flower embroidered on the front, a reminder of where it all began. Outside, a modest line had already formed, people from the neighborhood, longtime supporters of her old cafe, curious newcomers who'd heard rumors about the place with the lavender espresso and poetry on the cups. Nicholas met her near the register, his tie slightly crooked, coffee already in hand. "You ready?" he asked. She thought about it. She thought about her first sketch in the corner of her old notebook, about the day she dared to let someone hear her idea, about the whisper in her chest that had once told her to keep dreaming, even when everything else said stop. "I think I've been ready," she said softly, and turned the sign on the door to open. The first hour passed in a blur, doors flowing, customers smiling, music playing low and warm in the background. And then something unexpected happened. An older woman stepped up to the counter, her gray scarf dotted with tiny embroidered stars. "I had to come," she said, placing a small notebook on the counter. "I read your story in Local Makers. The article said you left your old job to follow a dream." Elena blinked. I guess I did." The woman smiled gently. "So did I. I used to be a nurse. Now I make teas from wild herbs I grow in my own garden. I brought you some to try." She opened the notebook to reveal samples of dried chamomile, rose hips, and lemon balm, all wrapped in parchment like little gifts from the earth. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. "This is beautiful. You inspired me," the woman said, "to not wait anymore." And just like that, Elena realized something she hadn't fully understood until now. This cafe wasn't just the result of her own courage. It was now a place that gave others permission to be brave, too. Over the weeks that followed, more moments like that one bloomed quietly and without fanfare. A young man who stuttered brought in a short story he'd written, asking if they'd consider printing it on a limited edition coffee sleeve. A single mother started holding poetry readings on Sunday mornings, her toddler in a sling as she recited verses. An old customer from Bean and Bloom stopped by just to say, "You always had something special. I'm glad the world sees it now." And in the middle of it all always was Elena, not loud, not boastful, but rooted, present, creating, listening. Late one evening, long after closing, she sat at the counter sipping her signature jasmine drink, now renamed the Reverie, watching the lights dim into golden hush. Nicholas joined her, leaning against the bar. "You know," he said, "I thought I was giving you an opportunity." Elena smiled. "And now I realize you gave me one. To remember what this all meant in the beginning." They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that doesn't ask to be filled. Then Nicholas reached into his pocket and placed something beside her cup, a small card, white, simple, her name printed in gold foil. Elena Vega, creative director and partner. The Quiet Cup. Her breath caught. "You didn't have to," he shook his head. "I did, because titles don't make people valuable, but sometimes they help the world see what's been true all along." Elena ran her finger across the letters, then tucked the card into her notebook, placing it gently between two pages filled with old dreams and new plans. And just before they turned off the lights and locked the doors for the night, she glanced around at the space they'd built, a space that had started with a quiet idea, shared over coffee. She whispered, more to herself than anyone, "This is just the beginning." Because some stories don't end when the doors open. They begin again every single morning. One cup at a time.